On the pod today, we have his official title is U.S. Senator from Hawaii, but he's known for his good tweets. Brian Schatz is with us in studio, and we're going to take some questions. Priyanka's here. We got some questions from the online crowd, and then we're going to do a little chatting too.
Senator, how do you feel about being having your position as one of 100 U.S. senators in the Congress side by side with the fact that you're a good tweeter?
I have mixed feelings about that.
Okay.
We'll dig into it later, I think.
Let's start with our latest constitutional crisis. Are you in favor of impeachment hearings? How do you think?
We're getting right to it.
How do you think things are going?
Listen, I actually listened to the debate that you're having in a way amongst yourselves, but probably across the country among progressives. What do we do about all this? Here's the thing that I think defines how we ought to move forward. People want to take impeachment off the table. I think that's super unwise. But I also think it's unwise to move forward with impeachment if we don't have the votes. I'm talking about on the House side.
Yeah.
I think it would be not a good look for us to sort of move to impeach and then we lose 30 or 40 Democrats. And so
do you think we need all of them?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think that there is no harm in building the case. And I think there is no harm in doing what Jerry Nadler is doing what Adam Schiff is doing, and sort of pursuing what your colleague is calling Watergate-style hearings, which may end up arriving at a point where we decide that articles of impeachment need to be brought to the floor, or it may be that the timing is such that we've essentially made the case to the American public and the election is upon us. So I'm sort of undecided on where this all lands, but I don't think there's much differentiation on where we should start, which is, Robert Mueller has to testify, these subpoenas have to be honored, and we have to do aggressive oversight.
Do you think what you've seen so far in the Mueller report is impeachable? Like, do you think that he's committed impeachable offenses, or are you still waiting for?
Listen, I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. First, obstruction of justice is an impeachable offense, but it's important to remember that when Nixon was impeached, it was the abuse of power that was the first article of impeachment, right?
Yeah.
It was Nixon trying to interfere with the Washington Post through his Federal Communications Commission, which sounds kind of quaint, right, looking back on it. And so one thing we need to remember is that it's not just a matter, and I think we screwed up a little bit and allowed the whole question to be defined as whether or not there was collusion, which of course there's no statute against collusion. But the use of presidential power, even if it is consistent with constitutional law or statutory law, if it is the abuse of that power, that's what the Congress is for, that's what impeachment is for. And so I look at whether or not this president is abusing his power, not whether or not specifically he's violating a statute. And one that I think rises to the level that everybody should be concerned with is the Emoluments Clause.
Yeah.
I mean, he is very clearly taking money from foreign governments through his enterprise. And the constitutional framers were very, very worried about this, and they explicitly banned it. And we've actually been successful in clearing the first hurdle of summary judgment in the D.C. Circuit. We were the plaintiffs, and we were basically saying, we're the legislative branch. Any emolument, any gift to the President of the United States from a foreign government has to be specifically and individually approved by the Congress. And they're not presenting any of these emoluments to us. So we do have standing, and we got over summary judgment, and now we're into discovery, and things will get very interesting.
So if we're obviously this impasse right now where Trump is saying, giving the Heisman to all oversight efforts, he's exerting privilege over things that make no sense for him to exert privilege over. If we move to impeachment, do you think it would make it easier somehow to compel those individuals to bring forward documents, to testify, and to otherwise give testimony?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question because I think that's a question of both the law and the complexion of the courts. And I'm not a lawyer. There is an argument that if you're doing things pursuant to an impeachment inquiry, then it has more legal weight. But I just don't know how that would play out through the court system. I will say that the White House strategy, and I don't think they started this way, but they are stumbling into daring us to do it, right? And I just wouldn't underestimate House members' and how much they jealously guard their prerogatives. So they're just starting to get increasingly pissed off at this. So people who sort of said, let's move cautiously, if they're just not going to cooperate, then I think you're going to get more and more momentum in the direction of aggressive oversight. And one other thing that I'll say, and this is I think it was the Mnuchin refusal to turn over the tax returns. He basically said this is not pursuant to a legitimate legislative purpose. There is no more legitimate legislative purpose than the legislative branch trying to determine whether the head of the executive branch is corrupted.
Right.
And so, that's one point. That's the substantive point. The other thing is that's our call. We get to determine what a legitimate legislative purpose is.
Right. Well, this is not a situation where there's no clear law and there's just an argument as to whether or not it's Congress's responsibility. There is a law, and it doesn't say if there's a legitimate legislative purpose as determined by the executive. There's just a sentence that says, give it to us.
Shall furnish.
Shall furnish. And listen, when I first got to the Hawaii legislature in 1998, one of the first things you learn is shall or may, right? If you have a bill that you think is a great idea, but you don't have enough juice to get it through, then they turn shall to may, and then you can claim credit. Shall means shall.
That's a good tip.
Shall means shall. And look, I'm not a lawyer, but I do have a really good LSAT score, and so I sort of approach it
Prove
from
it.
that
LSAT?
perspective.
Release the long form record.
There's no need for that.
Claiming executive privilege.
You can it's 2019. You can say whatever you want about what you did in your past. But so you made this point about that some of this is just about people getting angry. Do you think that explains what's happening in the Senate Intelligence Committee, where now we have a bipartisan effort to subpoena Donald Trump Jr.?
I'm not exactly sure what Chairman Burr is up to. I'm pleased that he seems to be continuing to work on a bipartisan basis. The most alarming part of this is not that you have a couple of United States senators on the Republican side who are saying, unlawful and cowardly things. That's sort of par for the course. The alarming thing from my standpoint is that there's deep reporting from a caucus lunch, right, where it's, twice a week, Democrats and Republicans go to separate lunches and sort of strategize their politics for the week or the month or whatever it is. And they had this conversation about the operation of the Intelligence Committee in caucus lunch. And I just feel like,
Is that not the place for that?
That is not the place for that, John.
What do the Democrats do during theirs? Do they just talk about Game of Thrones?
We talk about Game of Thrones, There's actually, the one complaint I will make about caucus lunch is everyone's just constantly applauding everybody else. Literally. There's just
so
a lot
annoying.
of wasted time going,
annoying.
you're doing great.
How's the food?
The food's actually pretty good.
Cool.
You know what?
A lot of participation trophies being given out.
Great floor speech, Chuck. Great chart, Chuck.
You can, that's funny. You can tell who sort of income levels by whether or not people like the lunch. Right?
Interesting.
So, if it's your 2 square meals a week, then you're, just got to the Senate. And if you're sort of complaining that this lunch is gross and they got to provide variety, maybe you've been around a little bit longer.
Right. Mark Warner brings his own. Not gonna force you to respond to that.
What do you want to hear from
Mark's
Mueller?
great, and he likes the lunch. All right.
There you go. What do you want to hear from Mueller? What would you ask Mueller when he finally testifies?
I actually think it's important to just let him speak. Because I think we just have to have some uninterrupted time to hear from Robert Mueller.
Yeah.
And there were some pretty obvious questions, right? Like sort of the spin on the ball that Bill Barr put in the first instance and in the second instance, and then sort of on an ongoing basis. But my view is that this person, a lot of people have not even heard his voice. And I think that you want to avoid the kind of like Zuckerberg's here on the Hill. Everyone's going to try to have their viral moment and put on social media.
Yeah.
We just want to basically give him a half hour, an hour, however long it takes for him to explain himself and to explain how he came to the conclusions that he came to. There's some obvious questions like the decision that he made not to charge, it seems to me, was based on the OLC opinion and not that there was insufficient evidence, right? And that I would like to confirm what is written, which is that he clearly intended to kick it to Congress, and Barr clearly sort of intercepted that play.
Yeah.
But my view is that if he goes to testify, he wants to say certain things, and we should probably do less talking and more listening.
Can I ask a question about the process there? Sorry to interrupt. When you guys have a big blockbuster hearing like that, it sometimes can feel like there's a series of 4-minute speeches followed by 1 minute of maybe a question. Is there an effort to coordinate and slice up important things we want to get to so that we hear from the witness?
Obviously not. No, yeah, no,
Maybe that's something you could do during the caucus lunch. Maybe between rounds of applause for not being in the majority, you could maybe say, "Hey, everybody, skip the preamble."
Well, there are sort of two things. First of all, don't chew up your 5 minutes with 4 minutes worth of pontificating. Yes, fair enough. But also the sort of coordination of sort of how you follow each other's line of questioning. First, you can do some kind of pre-planning, but sometimes what you have to do is be in the hearing and listening to your colleagues. I think Sherrod Brown, as the ranker on banking, does an excellent job. I mean, different members do more of an aggressive job of coordinating. But when it's a blockbuster, then members just say, I don't care what the play is, I'm going to have my moment. And that's when that's when everybody starts to tweet, oh, everybody should give all the questions to Kamala or whoever's doing, or Dick Blumenthal or whomever. And it's not so much that any individual is better or worse at sort of the interrogating process, although they're obviously,
but of course they are.
Some are better and worse. but the point being, we just need some uninterrupted time to kind of follow a string.
Yeah.
And people are, as you know, kind of blowing in, blowing out, so they don't even know what was talked about.
Right.
And then once they're done, they leave, right? So.
Cool system. How do you how do you feeling about the Senate recruitment efforts and our efforts to flip this thing in 2020?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of anxiety out there, and I like anxiety. I think people should be totally like on edge about everything, including winning the Senate, because we're sort of imagining a universe in which we, win the Senate and win the presidency and hold the House, and none of those are for sure. So I like that people have anxiety, but I think we're doing very well in North Carolina. I think we're doing well in some states that you may be surprised by. Colorado, a couple of candidates are looking at running in Maine, but it is a little bit early, and I've just sort of gone through the coverage of the sort of Politico or Hill or Roll Call. Here's how everyone's doing on recruitment, and it literally has, if any correlation, it's an inverse correlation with how successful you are in the coming cycle. So I just don't know. One other thought I'll offer is that there is a tendency to think that the person who is polling the best, in May of the odd-numbered year is the strongest candidate. So that has caused us to get a lot of former statewide elected officials in their 60s and 70s. And I just don't think that is necessarily who we want. I mean, there may be instances where that's the best candidate, but I think we need a candidate who represents this growing movement. And I don't think we necessarily need an actually young person, but like a Senate young person like me, like 46, 58, 62. But I don't think just because somebody was governor and popular, in the 80s or 90s means that there are like star recruit.
You're basically a Senate tween.
Yeah, I'm basically, exactly.
How does this recruiting process work? I mean, we talked about this the other day, and John was trying to be less anxious, and I was just emoting on a live stream. Like, is it Schumer and the DSCC recruiting people? Are others helping out that process? How does it work?
It depends state by state. So, there are certain states that you sort of go through whoever is at the top of the food chain, right? And and so there's a fair amount of that. And then I think, maybe because I come from Hawaii and we have primaries, and that's the way we roll, that I think, probably the best way to figure out who's the best recruit is to just let them run against each other, and whoever wins is by definition the best vote getter. Yeah. So I think we should do a little more of that. But certainly Chuck does a fair amount of personal recruiting and is very persuasive. I just had this conversation with Kirsten Sinema and a bunch of others. Catherine's doing an extraordinary job. I think we're going to have a bunch of female candidates that are going to be inspirational. But I also think that we shouldn't try to select who's our best nominee any more than we should do that on the presidential side.
If we do take the Senate back, what are your feelings on the filibuster?
Yeah, so I knew you were going to ask me
the
impeachment and filibuster.
Voter.
Yeah, listen, I think we ought to look at all of the Senate procedures and all the ways in which Mitch McConnell has sort of rigged the game. Yeah. And that's one of them. I think the way you do reconciliation is another one of them. I also think we ought to look at Puerto Rico statehood. And so all of these kind of structural reforms are important and serious and have to be part of the conversation. My own judgment is this just causes me anxiety, because I just remember in October of 2016, like sitting down with my staff, trying to figure out what good people we knew that would be interested in populating the Clinton cabinet. And so this just reminds me of the way we put the cart before the horse. But your point is a reasonable one, which is we are talking about a sort of vast array of progressive priorities, and we're going to have to make some structural changes to the way the country works if we want to actually implement them.
Well, I guess like follow up to that, like, win the Senate or not, is this a point where, like, do you see Republican senators, you work with Republican senators where you're like, you know what, on a big issue, maybe it's not a progressive priority, maybe it's not a really ambitious proposal, but we might be able to get 51, 52 votes or even 60 votes for this sort of medium range proposal that's not quite so ambitious.
Doubling money for the Centers for Disease Control.
Yeah,
Important,
like
but
a
not
middle class
controversial.
tax cut.
Sure, okay.
Like, do you think you could find Republicans to work with in the Senate, or how broken is the Senate and how partisan is it at this point, I guess?
It's not the old Senate. And I think part of what we're dealing with is that it's such a strong institution over time that everybody's trying to recreate the Senate of the 70s and 80s and 90s. First of all, it wasn't that great for people who were not in power, right? So this idea of comity and civility, it's important, and does characterize the institution, but it's also that it was comity and civility among people who were in power, who were primarily older white men. Yeah. And so people were getting screwed during those periods of civility pretty deeply. So that's one part of this. The other part is that underneath the battles, we've been able to do pretty well on appropriations, where, you know, there's an old saying, there's three parties in the Senate, Democrats, Republicans, and appropriators. And so we've been able to reject most of the most draconian things that Trump and Mulvaney have proposed as it relates to EPA, the National Park Service. I mean, they wanted to eliminate, or not eliminate, but drastically cut CDC and NIH funding. And we just went ahead and not just rejected those proposals, but massively increased medical research funding. So there are glimmers of hope, and I still want to cultivate all of that. But the ability to be an effective senator, in my view, is contingent on your ability to compartmentalize and be super disappointed with someone and then collaborate with them the following morning.
It's like parenting.
Yeah.
Okay. Senator, there's a lot of loose talk among some of your colleagues. Private Rubio speaks openly about, he acts like he commands the armed forces, and that if Maduro moves to take military action against the opposition in Venezuela, he will lead the charge like the Rough Riders into the country. Do you think there's any appetite for Trump to actually take military action in some place like Venezuela where there's clearly no legal authority and you guys would have to, I don't know, pass a bill?
Yeah, we'd have to do an authorization of the use of military force. That's number one. Number two is Maduro's a bad guy, and we hope there's a transition in leadership. Sure. But what you have to do is use all the tools in the toolkit, and I think you really ought to take military action off the table. That's what I think. As bad as this leader is, we do not need another war, and certainly not in this hemisphere. But John Bolton is behind all of this stuff, and he's cooking intelligence on Iran, and he's banging the war drums. And I think Trump sort of likes it to the extent that he thinks it's got electoral punch, maybe in Florida, and he doesn't want to look like a wimp. But now he seems to be like, well, I wanted to rattle a few cages, but I think he thought that, there was talk about he was on Maduro was on a tarmac, and it was basically going to be a coup. It was done. And now that it's not done, he's thinking, well, what's our next play, Mr. Bolton? And so, but I think we should understand that John Bolton is driving the bus on foreign policy. And for I would say half of your listeners who don't remember John Bolton, he's the guy that his whole thing is cooking intelligence and getting us into wars.
So gets him up out of bed in the morning.
That's his whole shtick.
It's his Thunder Road.
He's been doing that for a very, very long time, and he's very effective at it. I mean, he's not a clown in that way, and he's now doing it in multiple countries.
Priyanka, we got some questions?
Yeah, we got lots. Okay, so everyone here loves you on Twitter. Something you tweet about a lot, climate. So people want to know what your top 3 specific policy proposals that you want to see in any Green New Deal style legislation.
Oh, it's a really good question. First, I believe we need a carbon fee or carbon tax. And the reason for that is that it's just been proven to transform the economy quicker. Places that have done that have been able to make quicker progress on clean energy than anything else. Second, I think one of the most brilliant parts about the Green New Deal is that it recognizes that you can't just do a carbon fee or a cap and trade or some kind of renewable portfolio standard, as much as all of those are effective policies, because what you end up doing is creating the sense that this is an elite project and this is another thing that can be sort of traded as a derivative on Wall Street. And that was, Macron's problem in France, and I believe that's why the ballot initiative in Washington State failed. There's a saying a good friend of mine uses in Hawaii: paint a picture and paint me in it. So if we're going to build a climate movement, it has to not just be coastal liberals who are sort of configuring some technocratic solution, and that's essential. So we do need investments in communities. And the last thing I'll say is we really have to be very serious about bringing in organized labor, because coalition politics matters, because the Republicans do it sometimes better than us, but also because that should matter to us. If people who represent the workers that we purport to represent and fight for are uncomfortable with aspects of what we're talking about, then that isn't about, hey, you're afraid of this and you're not truly progressive. That is the truly progressive thought process. And next step is, okay, let's sit down and let's figure this out together and let's charge up the mountain together. So involving organized labor, I think, is essential to implementing a Green New Deal.
That was the original line in Titanic.
Is that right?
Paint a picture and paint me in it.
Is that right?
I just made that up.
Oh, God, I was super embarrassed.
Can I just follow up real quickly on Priyanka's question? Because you get all this praise for being great on Twitter, but your colleague Chris Murphy tweeted, those of us who follow the Brian Schatz Twitter feed know that he is consistently both grim and humorless. And so, that was shots fired from Mr. Murphy. So I did a little examination of his Twitter to see how, lit it is. And here's a couple examples. Turn on C-SPAN 2. I'm heading to the Senate floor now. Excited to have U.S. DOL Secretary with us in Connecticut today to showcase the success of our Eastern Connecticut Manufacturing Pipeline Initiative. Happy Easter, everybody. Ralph Wiggum gif. Do you think that he's winning the battle?
Everybody unfollow Chris Murphy.
Okay.
There's one thing you take from this live stream.
No, Chris and I have a lot of fun on Twitter, and I think... And I think we're a book or two, but there are very few of us who actually operate our own accounts.
You're at the controls.
Yeah, we're at the controls, and that means periodically I say a jackassy thing, but I think that's fine. Were you about to say more than periodically?
No, that's funny, but I wasn't. I think I was actually going to say, why are so many of your colleagues afraid to operate the machinery?
I don't know how afraid they are, but some of them are getting. Sheldon Whitehouse is tweeting his own stuff.
Nice.
And it's getting. And by the way, Sheldon has his own voice.
I was excited for converts.
And is so more and more people are getting interested, but also everyone's communications team is against it.
Oh, interesting.
Including mine on an ongoing basis. Mixed feelings, let's say.
Is that true? We're getting there's
Mixed
some
messages.
Mixed messages from your own.
Messages,
Yeah.
yeah.
How does Twitter feel about this, Priyanka?
All right, we have more questions. The people want to know, what issue do you think is not being covered enough right now? And then are there issues or news stories that you think are getting too much coverage?
Let me just take the first part of the question, housing. We have an affordable housing crisis across the country. And, I thought it was in sort of just high cost, high density places like Hawaii and big cities, but it's actually all the way across the country. And it's a huge middle class issue. And I think the extent to which this trade war is harming manufacturing in the Midwest and causing the bankruptcy of farmers sort of gets only talked about in the context of whether the Dow went up or down. And I think if your farm went bankrupt but the Dow's at 26,000, none of that matters. So we need to talk a little bit more about that. I'm not going to get into what gets too much coverage because I think that's just a little bit obvious.
2 follow-ups. One, as a patriotic American who respects the institutions and the pride we take as citizens of a country that ended the age of royalty.
Here we go.
Do you think it's embarrassing, if not shameful, that Americans care that a royal couple in a place in someplace in Europe had a baby?
I feel like I'm going to get in deep trouble for this one. No, I think it's cool. I mean, listen, if I like basketball,
Yeah, love it.
if I follow, if I follow basketball, I follow Game of Thrones. If there's a royal baby, like, you get to be excited about whatever you want to be excited about.
Okay, Senator Schatz, I'm going to forward you something called the Federalist Papers. After we're done here, you can take a look at that. I actually have a serious question about housing. So there is a lot of talk about the fact that we have a housing crisis. People can't afford to buy homes, right? We see that all across California. It's a huge problem. How much of the housing crisis is actually a sort of symptom of an economic inequality crisis? Like, how do you worry at all that efforts to target housing is an effort to avoid the larger structural forces that are preventing middle-class incomes from rising?
Well, I think it's an income problem, but it also is a supply of housing problem. And one of the things that we liberals, I think, have to get straight in our minds is that planning and zoning has its place, right?
Yeah.
But planning and zoning was the original redlining, right? It was the continuation of discrimination, especially against African Americans. So all of these laws about minimum lot size and what you could build where was to preserve the segregation of communities. And now it's not totally racial segregation. Now it's economic segregation. And lots of liberals still sort of haven't wrapped their mind around the idea that if we really want everybody to be housed, that you're going to have to see it. I mean, we had this conversation in Hawaii when we were moving towards a higher and higher percentage of our energy being generated from clean sources, that people say, well, I'm for clean energy, but I don't want that windmill is too big and it's near my house. If we're going to generate 100% clean energy, we're going to see a lot of windmills. And if we're going to house nurses and firefighters and young people and the elderly, we're going to have housing in places that might make us initially uncomfortable. So I feel very strongly about this. I take your point that we need to deal with income inequality sort of as a more general proposition, but housing is an urgent matter now.
All right. Kyle from YouTube wants to know, what's some advice for those of us in red states that are trying to flip them blue, or at the very least, purple?
First of all, run for office, campaign. I mean, look, California used to be purple. California used to be purple. Texas is turning purple. Georgia is turning purple. And so one of the reasons that we have failed in places is that we just literally haven't even tried, right? And I mean, this is a funny thing, but at one point, the state house of Hawaii was within 4 seats of being flipped to Republican rule in year 2000.
Wow.
And there were some districts that we thought were solidly Republican. And over basically 20 years, we've systematically taken those seats back. And now the balance of power in the legislature is 46-5 in the House and I think 25-0 in the state Senate.
Nice.
Wow.
I almost say that sheepishly, but so be it. But the point is, you have to compete everywhere and don't give up, because it may not be this election cycle that you're successful, but eventually it'll succeed. And one other thought I had is I just remember what a star Jason Kander is and was.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that he was such a big deal is that there were no other Jason Kanders, right? Mm-hmm. And that's because we hadn't done any work on building our bench and having members of the legislature and school boards and small town mayors. And now you have a whole generation of House members, Stacey Abrams and others who are younger, who have served in legislatures or as small town mayors or lieutenant governors or city prosecutors, who are our next up when there's an opportunity for them.
Can I ask a question about that? We've seen incredible candidates like Jason Kander come close. We've seen some defeats in states like Missouri. We've had trouble in the Midwest, and yet when ballot initiatives around democratic priorities, whether it's Medicaid or the right to work, or preventing the right to work laws from passing, or minimum wage, they pass in places like Idaho and Utah and Missouri and Arkansas. What do you see as the difference between a Democratic policy and a Democratic candidate right now?
Yeah, so this is a tough one, because I know what I want to say, and I probably shouldn't say it, but I'll just go for it. Nobody's watching, it's fine.
No.
I think people like Democratic policies, but they don't always like Democrats. Like, they just don't like us. They feel that we are being condescending. that we do feel like we have answers. So they love these policies, right? And, you know, in Florida, when Andrew Gillum loses and my good friend Bill Nelson loses, there's this ballot initiative that decisively wins, that gives back the franchise to vote to people who are incarcerated. And so you're right to point out this phenomenon. I don't have like a magic solution for it, but Idaho Medicaid won, right?
Right.
And I'll also just say that if we know that there's that kernel of truth, then we have to find those progressive priorities, and they are progressive, but they also happen to be compelling to independents and a lot of Republicans, and run on those next year. There is no shame in saying, I care about these 10 things, right? But these 6 things are the best vote getters, right? And I mean, on Twitter, it's like if you talk like that, you're some big sellout.
I know.
But winning is very important, and winning is maybe the most important thing. It's not that you sacrifice your...
It's important for a majority of people to like your proposal.
Yes. And
In the country.
And
It's an important
okay,
thing.
It's okay if one of your ideas is unpopular. You can still be for it.
Right.
But you don't have to put it in a TV ad.
Right.
And if you find out that Medicaid expansion and bread and butter issues are the ones that will cause you to be successful in the election, that's good, not bad.
Yeah. I called Jason this morning.
Did you?
You did?
He sent me the voicemail. So he's got one of those very millennial voicemails that's like, don't leave me a voicemail. Text me. So I did
really?
both.
Isn't the most millennial voicemail, the voicemail is full?
Oh yeah,
that's mine.
That's where I
my
live.
move.
That's
That's
my
my move.
wheelhouse,
You want
yeah.
to? Yeah, you're gonna have to
my
try
ages.
harder to get me. Because a voicemail is just someone saying, "I wanted to talk to you on the phone. You didn't want to talk to me, but I just had my half of the conversation anyway." It's incredibly rude.
Just text me.
How is that different from a text?
Well, a text is. I guess it's not. I've been defeated again by the from the greatest deliberative body.
Wow, I love this. Can you be here always? We have more questions from Twitter. Christina wants to know if you are lonely in the Senate now that half your colleagues are in Iowa.
Great question.
Well put.
You know, half my colleagues are in Iowa. And it's kind of exciting. Like, I send texts to them and try to be as just like personally supportive as I can. And it creates an opportunity for those of us who are not running to kind of dig into the policy piece because, listen, when you're running for, even if you're running for the state house, it's like not the time to be doing policy development if you're out there trying to get votes. Mm-hmm. And certainly if you're running for the United States Senate or the presidency, there's like no time anymore to sit down with your like ledge team and try to solve a problem. You're already off to the races. And so some of us have to, and I don't mean this facetiously, some of us have to do the legislative work so that if and when we take power, we're ready to roll. When the Republicans took power sort of, I think to their surprise, legitimately, they were not ready to roll on healthcare, and that's one of the reasons that they failed.
If you were a campaign manager on a Democratic presidential campaign right now, what would your big piece of messaging advice be? What would you want your candidate to be talking about?
For the general?
For the both.
Ha!
Because we know we don't want to pivot too much between the primary and the general.
So I think the first of all, let's start with the general. I think it's healthcare, and I think we have to prosecute the economic argument. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we should be so afraid of the stock market that we can't make the case that people are struggling because people really are struggling. And then in the background, there's going to be a drumbeat of, hey, this is the most corrupt administration, certainly in generations and maybe ever, right? And I don't think you necessarily have to be the candidate articulating all that. Maybe in a debate you kind of have an exchange, but that's not going to go into ads. But I think we would be unwise not to mention, by the way, right, this is terribly corrupt and awful, and Ryan Zinke and Scott Pruitt and all the rest of these guys are literally enriching themselves. And they're not just enriching themselves in the abstract, they are enriching themselves at our expense. On the primary side, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, listen, I've been to Iowa once, and it was like, I had to like disabuse I'm not running, I'm just trying to be helpful, whatever.
But you were thinking about it.
No, I was not. We
got a trial balloon.
But if somebody
people.
asked you the question, aren't you thinking about it?
Well, however I can best serve, John. No, that was a
Clip
joke.
it, send it out.
Yeah.
Sherman-esque.
That's 2 in a row. We got Abrams yesterday. We got Schatz on the hook today.
Cottage
we got
industry.
potential candidates coming through here.
Not running, never will. Thank you.
Never will.
Never will.
Wait, come
Yeah,
on.
never.
Hey, why are you doing that? Why say never?
Yeah, because what we really need is it anyway. So on the primary side, I actually do think that those debates are gonna be more important than your average debate because I think, probably 80%, whatever they're telling you, my guess is 80% of the voters are totally undecided, right? You may have locked into your specific preference, but if someone has a good moment, you'll be like, yeah, I like her. Done.
Right.
And so part of what we're going to measure is whether or not someone lines up, on your issues, on your core issues. Are they good for climate? Are they good for civil rights? Do they have a good background? Do you agree with them on X, Y, and Z? But a lot of it is an audition for the general. And I think it's okay for us to look at someone and say, how does that person match up against Donald Trump? So this electability question can very easily turn into a proxy for basically whether or not you're a white dude.
Right.
That's terrible. But I think lots of voters really are trying to figure out who's our most talented communicator, who's our best leader to marshal the resources of what we hope will be the biggest grassroots movement in American history. And I think it's okay for a voter to evaluate that, but we should just remember that the traditional analysis of electability is mostly always wrong.
Yeah.
Right. When senators text, are there emojis? Are there GIFs? Like, what's the vibe with your colleagues?
No, it's like full punctuation, capitalization.
like
that
sign,
kind
Like
of
you're
thing.
writing an email.
Like,
kinda
love,
thing.
Chuck.
Yeah.
That's how my mom texts. It
There's
was
no,
like
there's
full
no,
sentences of
there's no
paragraph.
texting with Chuck. Yeah,
Really?
I mean, not with me. No. He has a flip phone. I mean, I guess he could text from it. But I think he can receive texts.
What is the latest or earliest time Chuck Schumer has called you?
Oh, well, I mean, there's a 6-hour time difference. So, yeah, it would be 3 a.m., Hawaii
Nice.
time. And I just go, hey, Chuck, it's a blocked caller. Hello? I know it's Chuck. Who else is calling me at 3 a.m. in Hawaii? But hello, Mr. Leader. Yeah.
Sweet.
Tough.
Okay, so there's so many good ideas out there from all these 2020 candidates. What legislation proposed by a candidate would you be most interested in seeing getting passed?
Oh, gosh. I mean, let me list a few because, this is
Yeah.
one of those things where it's like, I love
Careful.
all my siblings exactly the same. Elizabeth she has plans for everything, and I sit on the banking committee with her, and I think that she has an extraordinary ability to understand not just the problem as a general proposition, but what pathway could be taken to fix it. Bernie, I think, has diagnosed part of our problem as a society, which is that we really do need to do movement building, not just like the sort of technical aspects of legislation. I love Corey's baby bonds idea. I love what Corey has done on environmental justice. I think that's quite overrated. I mean, not overrated. Excuse me, Corey. Underrated. Because he's done these environmental justice tours and nobody has really paid, I think, enough attention to it. Kamala's Lift Act, what Kamala wants to do for teachers. Jay Inslee just signed probably the second best climate bill in the country after Hawaii. And I'm sure I'm leaving someone out, and that's going to
If you're
cause me
going
to
to do
get in
them all,
trouble.
we're going to be here a while. So.
Yeah.
Really?
But I
So-
do love
so
all
what-
my children equally.
Really hearing that you despise John Hickenlooper.
I like Hick. I met him when he was mayor.
We call him the loop over here. Pod Save
And
America.
I'll also say that I'm excited about climate plans coming out, and I'm going to personally make an effort to just see to it. I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of it because you guys know probably better than I do that once you get into an administration, it becomes, okay, we're going to do climate. Now what's possible, right? But Beto's plan is serious. Jay's plan is serious, and I anticipate all of the major candidates will have a major climate plan. My litmus test is, do you have a sufficiently ambitious climate plan? Not, does it look like mine?
Right.
Okay, this is a little bit different from the 2020 question, asking about your Republican colleagues. So who is the most unlikely collaborator you've ever had in the Senate? And can you tell us about a time where someone surprised you with wanting to team up with you on an issue or to work on a bill?
Yeah, Jim Inhofe. So Jim Inhofe, for those of you who don't know, wrote a book called The Great Hoax.
Snowball on the Senate floor.
About climate change. And, and I got to the Senate and ran for the Senate because climate is my, lifetime passion. But Jim and I did a bill together to honor Native American veterans. And frankly, on this bill, he was a prince and a very skilled legislator. So this is the problem of the Senate, which is that if you're not able to compartmentalize, then you will be totally ineffective. Because, I could have very easily said, listen, you think climate change is a hoax. Not just that, but you wrote a whole book about it. I can't deal with you. But if you operate that way, especially in this environment, by process of elimination, you will find no partners.
How do you, like when you say the name Jim Inhofe, I'm filled with a kind of rage, like a deep and like permanent rage that I don't think I could contain if I met him. Like I'd really have to get into it. So where do you put that?
I put that into productive places, right? I try to figure out how we can win the Senate back.
It's called social discipline.
Yeah.
What? Now, people keep saying that to me, and I have no idea what they're talking about.
But like, do you
Not yelling at Lachlan Murdoch at a dinner.
Did you? Oh, you did that.
Whatever. Listen,
I know I'm the guest, but can I hear more about that?
Look, someone said, Catherine Murdoch said, do you want to meet Lachlan Murdoch? I said, no good will come of it. And then the next thing I know, I was being introduced to Lachlan Murdoch. And before I knew it, I was shouting, are you proud of yourself? Are you proud of yourself? Are you proud of what's happening from 8 to 11? And then he said something like, you want everyone to be Rachel Maddow. And then it was over.
Oh, so it wasn't that eventful. except you're famous.
That was the only bad response.
It wasn't like Tom Arnold getting in a fight with.
No, I'm not gonna.
No, it
I'm not
was
gonna
a-
throw down.
it
I
was
was
a
wearing
heated exchange.
I looked great. I wanted to stay looking great.
Yeah, okay.
But no, it was a heated moment. Everybody was uncomfortable. That's what I said at the time. Like it wasn't like a fun, amazing confrontation. It was just an angry, awkward exchange at a party. And I'm glad I did it. I'd do it again.
Appreciate it.
You never worked on legislation together after that.
Thank you
though.
for your service.
We are working. We are yes. Nothing for veterans out of me and Lachlan yet.
But this is something you're going to have to work on if you're going to run for the Senate.
That's
John.
true.
You know what? We got to find the right state for me. All right, it may not exist yet. I don't know. I don't
New
know where.
senator from Puerto Rico. Charles.
So I actually had that thought, and I was like, that's a very bad idea.
Very bad. Very bad.
All right, so people in the live stream want to know about the heartbeat bill that was signed this week in Georgia.
God.
Do you think this will survive? And then what do you think about ideas like stacking the Supreme Court, things like that?
Well, on the heartbeat bill, I think it's just important to say reproductive choice, abortion services are health care. So when we say they're coming after your health care, it's not just they're coming after eviscerating the ACA through the courts and through legislation and through administrative actions, but they're coming after women's health care in a very straightforward way. And I think the most sort of apocalyptic claims about what the Republicans want to do over time are turning out to be true. So that's number one. I have no idea if it'll survive the court process, but certainly they think it will, and they think it will for the very simple reason that Mitch McConnell has declared the United States Senate to be a legislative graveyard, and basically every week we go in and we process nominations to the circuit courts and the district courts, and they believe that they will succeed not just on this but on other sort of anti-progressive legislation all the way through.
Got it.
Not great.
Not great. All right, well, we'll switch to some fun questions because we have a lot for you as well. First off, this I think was asked at least 20 times. How do you kill time on your flight, deal with jet lag flying from Hawaii to Washington all the time? What are your tips for us?
Oh, well, tweeting obviously is how I kill my time on the airplane. I don't really have any good advice about airplanes other than it's super dehydrating and people don't really think that way. So get an aisle seat and then drink lots of water. But I'm grouchy a lot. I mean, Mondays are bad, and Fridays are I'm a little jet lagged, but at least I'm home. So that takes the sting off.
Go Wi-Fi. Can you do something about those people?
I cannot.
Is there any accommodation made for people from Hawaii or Alaska who clearly have a more challenging time getting to votes on Mondays and Thursdays than Delaware?
Nope. Whatever. As well as Sherrod says, no whining on the yacht. It's fine.
Got it. Okay. Sure. The guy who's never been on a yacht.
All right, what's the best time of the year for people to visit Hawaii?
Oh gosh. There are no bad months. I think a lot of people, especially on the East Coast, think it's like super muggy and terrible certain times a year and all the rest of it. It's pretty great all the time. Spring's fine. January, December. There's not a bad month.
You got whale season in the winter.
Yeah, whale season in the winter.
Got all the humpbacks with their
Surf in
babies.
the
We went in
Summer.
February. It was wonderful.
So cool.
Beautiful.
It's pretty much always great.
It's paradise.
No one is disappointed when they go to Hawaii.
That makes sense. When you're in D.C., so not at home, what is your favorite thing to go eat? Where do you go? What are your spots?
Oh, my eating habits are very depressing. Sometimes district taco, but that's like just B+. And then I moved to the side of the hill where I'm like across the street from a grocery store. So like my meals are sad.
In that hot
Sardines on rice, sort of like wheat thins, cheese, salami, fruit.
Sardines on rice. Are you a prisoner?
I like sardines on rice.
It's like a rail car hobo. That's a sad meal.
Hot sauce.
Yeah, that's right. Did you get off the rail car and take your bindle and go to the Senate?
I don't know what a bindle is, but yeah.
It's that like ball on a stick. you
Oh,
know?
I got it.
The
Okay.
rotisserie chickens are good because they'll last for a couple days.
Yeah. It's fine.
This is the
But
rotisserie
I
chicken.
basically,
One guy to
I
another.
don't eat very well.
Okay, got it. Something
Tuesdays and Thursdays, yeah.
we've also been discussing a lot in this office: Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
Do you watch and do you have thoughts on how this should end?
I did well. I don't have any thoughts about how it should end. Well, I want Tyrion to be on the Iron Throne. That's what I
Tyrion.
think.
All right,
Cool,
good.
okay.
Good,
But
you
here's the
finally
thing.
got an
This is
answer.
kind of a
It's the
weird-
correct answer.
What's that?
It's the correct answer to want Tyrion.
I like short, cerebral guys.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
no, it's right back. Same.
But it's such a bad. So I'm on the red eye at 8 p.m. And so I could watch it live at like 3 in Hawaii, but that's kind of a waste of a good Sunday afternoon with my family. So I end up watching last week's episode, like tonight or tomorrow during the day.
So you
whenever
haven't
I
seen last week's
I haven't
episode
seen-
yet?
Yeah. So
sorry.
yeah.
Everybody
How
chill
how
out.
do you deal with that? You're on Twitter so much.
I get off Twitter for about 24 hours.
Smart.
Wow.
Not 24 hours.
Now, if your tweets are
not
important for
crazy.
the messaging of the Democratic Party, is the fact that you're not keeping up with Game of Thrones like hurting our chances to win in 2020?
Yeah, I think it hurts.
It's called Benioff.
Last question. You got the answers.
Another thing that's very important to Crooked Media fans: do you have a dog?
Yeah, we have two dogs.
Two?
I have like a tiny little lap dog, a Bichon Shih Tzu named Shumai, and then we have a Great Dane called Jupiter.
Whoa.
Oh my gosh.
Variety.
Yeah,
Were you going for sort of a comedic walk?
yeah, kind of. We have a Christmas picture where it's a funny picture. But what we wanted was a big guard dog that wasn't actually dangerous, but terrifies people
Yeah.
who may be up to no good.
Were they like a $180?
No, she's not. I mean, she's small for a Great Dane. She's like 130. But she's, on her hind legs, she's a good 7 feet tall.
That's unbelievable.
That's cool.
All right, the last one from our pals at Crooked HQ. Do you have thoughts on the song "Shots" by LMFAO? We were always wondering if it was ever considered for one of your campaigns. I don't know.
We had the conversation.
Okay.
But, I've got good staff, and they decided that it was unwise.
It's not for you.
But someone did one of my supporters turned it into a video, and we liked it.
Oh.
One of our staffers tried to remix it by shouting your name over a somewhat similar beat to avoid copyright restraictions, and it was.
Well,
We thought maybe-
refrain.
We thought
You've
we'd
heard that
spare you
before.
that.
It was just
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
It was just it was a great try. But
Wow.
it felt like we didn't want to do that to you.
It's a little eager.
Senator Schatz, thank you for joining us, and please always, feel free to use Crooked Media as your layover.
Yeah, anytime.
Stop. Anytime.
Whenever you want.
Nice to see you guys.
It's great to run out the shots clock with you.
Oh no,
That's well done.
shots fired. All right.
Thank you.
That was so great.